I'm Laura Tyson. I am a distinguished professor of the graduate school at the Haas School of Business, University of California, Berkeley.
I am Daniel Weiss, co-founder and managing partner of Angelino Group, a Los Angeles-based venture capital and growth equity investment firm. My partners and I founded the firm in 2001, making us one of the longest-standing purpose-built sector-focused investment organizations in the space.
What motivated you to write and do research on climate finance?
My motivation really goes back to my involvement with Al Gore. I worked closely with him when I was in the Clinton administration on climate issues. I stayed involved with him as he launched a very important new firm, the first firm really, called Generation Investment, which was looking at environmental, social, and governance issues in evaluating how publicly traded companies behaved. Investors were increasingly interested in this, and Al Gore provided a new financial institution. I stayed involved in this space, working actually through on the regulatory or accounting side. There was something called the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. There was a real pressure growing all through 2010 to 2020. More and more investors wanted to know what their investing firms were doing in the climate space. They wanted more information. They wanted standardized information. They wanted comparable information. They wanted information that accountants could develop that would be as important as fiduciary information on financials. So I stayed involved in all of that. I followed climate technology. I followed climate finance. And then I decided to organize we have a think tank at Haas, the Sustainable and Impact Finance Group, very much focused on investment and investment in climate. And then finally, I want to bring my co-author into this story. I ended up meeting Daniel, realizing that I had been his Econ 1 professor many ago. I learned about his firm. I was very interested in what the firm was doing. I went to a number of, he has outstanding advisory group and advisory discussions. I learned a lot about climate finance in the current day because he, as he said, one of the innovators in this space, but continuing to innovate. So we held a conference together. Daniel helped me organize the conference at Haas. And then I realized that actually this was worth an article. This was worth putting together what are the financial market innovation to finance climate investments.
Thank you for those kind words, Laura. First, let me just start by saying how much fun it was to work with Laura on this piece. A friend, a colleague, a former professor, as she noted, and a long-standing member of our board of advisors at Angelino Group. In our line of work as institutional investors, we don't often get the time to reflect on some of the trends and drivers, big picture, that are affecting our space in climate finance. And this work, this research and analytical process that we went through with Laura in crafting this article gave us a real opportunity to think and reflect about some of these trends and drivers in ways that we don't often get to do in our day job. And for that, among many other things, we're grateful. In terms of the motivation to write the piece, while we've made a great deal of progress in climate finance, certainly over the last decade, we've got a long way to go. And so if we're going to get close to mobilizing the roughly $150 trillion that some analysts suggest we need to spend to achieve net zero by 2050, we're going to need to grow the amount of capital that's going into the space. So again, much progress has been made. According to some estimates, the climate finance world is 25x the size of what it was, or has grown 25x from roughly 2013 to 2023. But we're still running more than $3 trillion a year shy of where we need to be in order to achieve some of those net zero goals. And so this paper was an opportunity to take a step back, look at where we've been, look at where we are, and look at where we're going, and see if there are any interesting trends and innovations in the world of climate finance that can help us accelerate and mobilize those dollars to achieve those goals.
What do you find is the most compelling about the paper and topic?
I want to start again with the motivation, and then I think to the conclusion. First of all, most technologists, and this is really remarkable, believe that we have at least 2/3 of the technologies we need to get to net zero. So we have a problem of how you speed and scale the technologies that exist already. Now, clearly, we also want to develop new ones, and I'm not saying that's not important, but I'm saying that, wow, we already have made great progress in the technologies. The problem is speeding and scaling. And that is where the financial markets come in, because most of this money to reach net zero is going to have to come from, not from governments, but from private actors, from the capital markets, from the capital markets that are publicly traded securities and the private credit markets, the equity funds and the venture capital funds. So that is, I think we definitely wanted to say, here's the technology, here's the size of the financing gap. We believe that that financing gap is going to be primarily the responsibility of the private sector. What the government can do, and we'll talk about that again, is set policies in place which encourage the private sector, okay? But the money is going to come from the private sector. And then furthermore, we took from the beginning the view that in order for the private sector to do this, the investments are going to have to meet market rates of return, risk-adjusted rates of return. This is not, investors are investing to achieve a risk-adjusted rate of return. Some of them have longer time horizons, some of them have a little more appetite for risk, so they might go into venture capital, but basically that's the motivation. So we then said, all right, how are the capital markets themselves innovating? The technology has been innovating. How do the financial markets? And we found many, many, many examples. And we focused on the US and Europe. They're the two biggest capital markets in the climate space in the world. China's another, but we did not. China has a very particular financial structure, a very particular set of policies. We focused on the US and Europe, and we were, I think, really, I would say a compelling finding is that, yes, innovation is going on. It's going on in large banks. It's going on in the JP Morgans and Morgan Stanleys of the world. Absolutely going on there. It's going on in the ESG markets, in money management, because more and more investors are saying, I really want climate focus. Forget the general E or the general S or the G. No, I want climate focus. So then the money managers come up with really interesting new investment opportunities. Then if we go to the private markets, we've seen innovations in a variety of ways. I'll mention one, and then maybe Daniel can mention some more. So Daniel is in the private market space, okay? And in that space, for example, there's been this amazing development of big corporations deciding they want to invest in climate technology. They want to learn about the technology. They want to support it. And probably at some point, they may actually want to buy it. They may actually want to buy a small firm that's innovating. So that's just an example. I would say the private markets, that the markets, both publicly traded securities and all of the private credit markets, we see and document a number of really important innovations. And I think that, therefore, that gives us optimism. That gives us optimism. But we do have to note there's still a long way to go. And I think that, so the conclusion is, yes, we've seen innovation. We identify a number of innovative measures in the capital markets that are mobilizing capital. But we say, we've got to do more, got to do more.
In addition to some of Laura's observations, perhaps just to add some other examples of notable trends or developments that we saw. One is the entrance, particularly as Laura was suggesting, in private markets and private equity, of later stage dedicated funds into the space. So over the last few years, there's been a significant influx of late stage private equity capital focused on climate. This was not the case even 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. And it's having a couple of interesting impacts in the capital markets landscape. One is it creates another pool of capital to help scale and grow businesses in the space. Two is it creates a third door to walk through for earlier stage investors to achieve monetization or liquidity for their investments. Whereas historically there were two primary doors to walk through, either an initial public offering accessing the public capital markets, or a trade sale, an M&A event to a corporate strategic buyer. There is now a significant number of dedicated private equity actors that are stepping into investing in the space. As Laura suggested, there are a number of other interesting trends that and innovations that we get into in the paper. But the short summary is that there's a lot of innovation going on in the space, and it's not an accident that there's been 25x growth in the amount of capital that's being invested in the space over the last decade or so. Some of these innovations are catalysts for this and perhaps could be scaled. And one of our hopes is that practitioners as well as policymakers can examine and perhaps add to this list of innovations in climate finance to help, as Laura said, scale and accelerate the path to mobilize capital in this space.
What key points do you think are most important for other scholars and lay people to take away from this article?
I want to start with Elizabeth, lay people. I would say that there are, first of all, many people who are interested in their own investment portfolio to have climate investment opportunities. And what this article shows is there are more and more of such opportunities because the capital markets respond. The money management firms respond. The private equity firms respond. And so one message is for those private investors who want their own investment portfolio to be significantly focused on finance. There's a lot of opportunities to do that now, and probably more every day. So people should know about them, and then they can make use of them. I think that then I'll go to the business sector itself. The business sector itself is actually, as I said, more and more interested. Many firms, many firms now, and are being required throughout the world, mainly required by Europe, basically to say, what is their net zero plan? What are they doing? How are they doing? What's happening to their carbon emissions? We actually want to know that, say the investors to the firms. The firms then have to say, all right, what is our strategy? What investments should we be making? What technologies should we be adopting? Can we find new technologies out there that we can absorb into our business? So the pressure on firms to do decarbonization is coming partly from policy, partly from investors, and firms are responding. And again, I think compelling here is the way we see firms trying to do that. As far as key points for scholars, I feel and I think it's recognized that the academic field of finance in climate has been behind. It's just been behind. There are very, very few courses in the world that focus on that aspect of the financial markets, which is growing dramatically quickly. That's what we heard that from Daniel, but not an understanding of that. It's starting to change. But frankly, I would say that finance scholars should actually learn about the rapid changing space here. And that can help them in terms of their own research. And it can help them in terms of teaching students who are interested in climate finance. So I think there is an important area here. The final group I really want to emphasize, and Daniel and I shared this going in, is policymakers, because we say at the very beginning of the paper, and we try throughout the paper to say, what have policies in Europe and the US? So we really focus on those two markets. What have policies done to increase investor interest, or what I would say is to increase the risk-adjusted rate of return? Okay, so clearly the tax credits in the United States absolutely do that. That's what that tax credit is, a rate of return direct link. There are very interesting series of tax credits for users of the technology, for producers of the technology, for consumers of the technology. So that's a very powerful, and we talk about that. We talk about the Loan Program Office of the United States, the Department of Energy. This is an amazing situation because what we learned is that a lot of the private market investors, they look to the LPO as the best organization to assess the likelihood of success of a particular technology. Okay, they have real expertise. The private firms are developing that expertise, but right now the LPO can work with them. So those are just a couple of examples. In Europe, I already mentioned that basically what regulations are doing is essentially requiring the banks and the firms, so the financial markets, even private equity firms, everybody who is basically claiming to be about decarbonization has got to document what they're doing. Data. And more data is going to be very, very helpful here, because I think we'll be able to use AI to assess the effectiveness of some of this, because we're developing a very rich data pool. So I would say that's also should be of attraction to academics. I know that policymakers in the United States are constantly looking at evidence to see, are the policies working? And so I think this is another sort of piece of evidence for them, showing them that where it's working is by magnifying the flow of private capital going into climate finance.
Perhaps to add a few other thoughts or frame it. One is, there are three primary stakeholders, as Laura alluded to, that we're trying to reach in this paper. Academics, and Professor Tyson did a brilliant job of explaining where the opportunities are and gaps there better than I ever could. Two would be the private sector, which includes both institutional investors as well as corporations. And thirdly, the public sector, which includes governments as well, individual governments as well as multilateral institutions. With respect to the latter two, that is to say the private sector and public sector, as opposed to the community of scholars and academics. In the private sector, a few messages to add. One is that, as Laura suggested, there are opportunities, as evidenced, we believe, by the substantial growth in capital being deployed in the space, to deliver superior risk-adjusted financial returns to investors. Again, it's not an accident that there has been such significant growth and mainstreaming, frankly, in the institutional investment world of climate as an area of investment. Secondly, in terms of messaging, corporate players, both in the United States and Europe and potentially in other parts of the world, we hope to shine a light on the fact that deployment of capital in this space can be good business, not just for investors, but for corporate actors as well. And then for the public sector, we hope to deliver a modest beginning of a roadmap or an inventory of tools and examples in innovation in climate finance that have worked, are working, and perhaps can be scaled as we walk together on this journey of mobilizing more capital into the climate finance world. So we are both, I think Laura and I ended the writing of this piece on feeling optimistic, notwithstanding, again, this more than $3 trillion annual gap that we're facing in terms of mobilizing the amount of capital we need to achieve net zero by 2050. But as we sit here, nearly in 2024, at what is nearly the midpoint of what has been referred to as the decade of climate in the 21st century, there are many reasons to be hopeful that we'll be able to scale deployment of capital in the space. And this article represents, our humble attempt to outline a series of tools that are working and that might be scaled, and that these stakeholders, again, at least from our perspective, thinking primarily about the private sector and public sector actors, might be able to participate and utilize some of these tools and build on them to mobilize more capital to invest in a sustainable world.
That's a wrap. Thank you.